Good evening, good morning, wherever you are joining us from. We are happy to have you join us for the last session, certainly not the least session, on solidarity. It's going to be chaired by Charlene Edwards. Charlene is the Executive Officer of the Melbourne Social Equity Institute. Her role is to facilitate and support interdisciplinary and community-engaged research across a range of social equity issues. She is the co-creator and director of the Institute's Successful Community Fellows Program, which supports community organizations to undertake research of importance to their organization and the people they serve. I'm very excited to have Charlene here. She represents the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, who are partners with us for hosting this conference. Charlene, thank you for making the time. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franka. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Boomerang people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you, Franka, for inviting me to be here today. The Social Equity Institute is really proud to be partnering with the African Studies Group on our second joint international conference. And I just very quickly like to acknowledge that Claire Smitty from the Social Equity Institute has done all the hard work on the Institute's behalf in the background. So thank you. And when Franka first asked me to chair this session, I thought that this was a perfect time because my daughter has soccer training. I would have a quiet house, the dog would be out, but that is not the case because we're in lockdown. So this is an apology in advance if I'm interrupted by small people or small dogs. So this is a really exciting session. We've got speakers joining us from the Northern Hemisphere to talk to us about solidarity in action. Our first speaker is Eunice Abbey, who hopefully the lights have turned on at her university now. And she was in a bit of a blackout when we first spoke to her, but her internet is hopefully working. She's currently a lecturer at the Department of Social Work at the University of Ghana. Eunice completed her PhD at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and her research interests lie in the areas of gender issues, health and well-being of vulnerable population groups, developmental studies, and rural health. Eunice's paper is entitled "The Silent Voices, the Position and Constraints of Rural Women in Siniensi Community in Northern Ghana." I really hope I said that correctly. Over to you, Eunice.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlene. And we are still in blackouts too. My apologies again, I will not be able to turn on my video. Let me share my screen with you. Okay. Please, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I'm presenting on the topic, the silent voices, the position and constraints of rural women in Siniensi community in Northern Ghana. The outline of my presentation, brief introduction, of course, the objective, my methodology findings, and then the implications for leadership roles, which I would love that it takes a form of a discussion. So I didn't touch much on that section, and also the way forward. Well, when we talk of well-being, you all agree with me on how important it is to all of us. And it goes beyond a condition where people are not just physically well, but also the ability to address the challenges ranging from social and environmental to economical, issues in order for them to live in dignity and participate actively in society. Now, when it comes to the developed countries and then middle income countries like Ghana, for instance, the disparity is great and noticeable. Of course, well-being has been greatly achieved in the developed countries, but there have been a lot of challenges when it comes to the middle-income countries like Ghana, and even so, more difficult for those in the rural areas, because these are environments that are challenging for people to attain well-being for obvious reasons, lack of resources and the others. And then when it comes to women, especially, well-being for them has been a major concern for international organizations, women empowerment groups and institutions who are constantly calling for the availability and quality of basic resources to improve the well-being of such women. Again, these women in the rural areas play a key role in supporting their households, generating income, feeding, taking care of the children, and many other activities just to promote and enhance the well-being of their households. However, regardless of these significant roles that they play, they continue to face all sorts of persistent constraints from their societies or environments that hamper their ability to enjoy well-being and also to actively participate in society. So this sort of laid the foundation for my research. Is actually an aspect of my PhD research that I did. So one of the objectives was to explore the factors that constrains women's level of participation in Siniensi community. So let me just give you a brief background into this community. Now, it is located in the Upper East region of Ghana, and it is one of the smallest region. The Upper East is the smallest and also the most poorest, according to statistics in Ghana. So I thought that it would be interesting to actually find out how these women are doing, especially being tagged with these sort of negative labels. Now, so this is how most of the houses in Siniensi community look like. So mostly made of mud and then hut roofing. They lack a lot of basic amenities, no electricity, no water, no hospitals. As at the time I was doing my research, there was a clinic though, but then it lacked a lot of the equipment, resources needed to actually enhance the health of the people. So for instance, this motor cane here, which looks like a motorbike, is actually the ambulance used in the community. So anytime there was an emergency situation, this was the vehicle that they used sort of to convey people to major hospitals in the cities. The main economic activities of the people are farming, others engage in other economic activity like selling of items, just to make money, but then farming is the main economic activity in the community. So I adopted a qualitative research method, specifically phenomenology. The participants were 10 women. And then I looked at women with various religious backgrounds because I wanted to capture the diversities in these backgrounds and how that influenced their well-being and their ability to participate in society when it comes to decision makings and the rest. Married women, those who are widows, women who have children, those who are engaged in farming or any other economic activity. My data collection methods basically in-depth interviews and then observation, and I adopted Creswell 2009 steps in qualitative data analysis. Of course, all other ethical protocols were also observed. Now to my findings, I'll just share briefly two key themes that kept emanating from my interviews and discussions with the women. One of the themes is patriarchy. This basically has to do with men wielding the most power in this community and having the final say when it comes to decision making. And let me quickly add that in the northern part of Ghana, most of the communities are predominantly stuck to this patriarchy, which is also part of their culture. So they are patriarchal in nature, most of them. Now, in my interaction with the women, most of them agreed to the fact that when it comes to decision making, those that concern themselves and even their household, they had no say. For instance, the number of children that they should have, the women do not decide that, the men decide. So if the man wants 10 children and the woman wants 2, is the words of the man that are final. And then the women sort of do not have any voice or any say when they attend meetings on issues concerning their own community developmental issues. The women were hardly given the opportunity to make any input or any suggestions. Even if they had the opportunity to do so at all, at the end of the day, it's what the men decide that will work. Again, when it comes to issues related to finances, though women could be farming, the men could be farming. Once a woman sells the product from the farm, any money she makes must be accounted for to the husband. And then whatever she has to decide in using the money for, it has to come from the husband as well. So basically, they just do not have any voice. I mean, it's a sort of a master and a servant relationship between the men and the women, according to what one of the participants told me. And then when it comes to leadership roles, this patriarchal nature of this community significantly has affected the women's ability to assume leadership roles. Because right from the onset, through socialization, women are taught to behave as women, they are supposed to be submissive, etc. So then when it comes to leadership roles, that has to do with giving instructions, assuming authority, then it automatically goes back to the men. Women shy away from these leadership roles. But then let me quickly add that there are special departments sort of that have been created for women, but then they target as, for instance, a women or women's organization. So that tag of being a woman's organization also implies that you are supposed to do womanly, in quotes, womanly things. So then that boundary sort of limits them. They are not supposed to cross over to join other agencies or departments where the men can easily pass through and do whatever they want to do. And then when it comes to the access to productive resources, I will stress on land. Land because this, most of the women I interacted with valued lands. They still do value lands because the role it plays in their livelihoods. They farm on these lands. It provides food and nutrition for their families. The products or the produce they make from their farming are sold, and of course, it brings some sort of income to them. And so, but then if farming is gendered in the community, as well as the access to the lands. For instance, men are noted to cultivate yam, the farm produce that when they are sold, they generate a lot of income. But then women do more of the vegetables. When you compare the prices, they gain less. And then when it comes to the allocation and access to lands, mostly they are assigned lands that the men have already farmed on for like 5 to 7 years. And then these lands have lost their nutritional values. And so once they are handed over to the women to farm on, they do not get a lot of produce from them. And then there's nothing like ownership, even when it comes to these productive resources like lands, for instance, they don't get to own them, right? So one participant called Momo, of course I use pseudonyms. We have so many things in mind to say, but we cannot. If we try, we will either be seen as arrogant or disrespectful. we feel like we are not as important as the men, and so are our views. It is not surprising that many of the young ones are running from here to the cities, right? So this Momo is trying to say that their inability to express their views, once you do so, you are tagged as being arrogant or disrespectful. And this even cuts across not just at the rural level, even to the national level. Once women dare to participate or assume roles or positions that people have the perception of being traditionally belonging for the men, they are given all sorts of labels and then tags. For instance, there was this at the national level, Ghana, this widow whose husband was an MP. So once the husband died, she decided to take over, sort of vie for the position that the husband held when he was alive. And there was all sorts of backlash from a lot of Ghanaians. People were calling her bloody widow, all sorts of negative labels for daring to assume such a position. And also
Sorry,
from
Eunice.
Amina,
Sorry,
yes.
Eunice, you've got 3 minutes left.
All right.
Thank you.
You dare not challenge what your husband tells you, even if you do not like it. You just do as he says. They are like our masters and we are their servants. We depend on them for everything. I do not like it here, but there's nothing I can do. And then on negative traditional practices, again, I will only touch on widowhood rights because of time. Well, this is performed when a woman loses a husband. Usually it's a right that lasts for 3 to 7 days. So the woman is usually kept in a room, the hair is shaved, the private part is shaved. And then this rites is performed to ascertain whether the woman had a hand in the death of the husband. So they boil hot water, and then there's a cold water as well, but they pour the cold and hot water simultaneously on the woman. So once the widow reacts or suffers or gets any burns on the body, it's implied that she had a hand in the husband's death. Now, as a researcher, and I was wondering, I mean, how could such a right actually determine whether this person had a hand in the husband's death or not? Probing further, I heard stories of instances where people had actually confessed to having a hand in the husband's death. But then again, is it because of the excruciating pains they are being put through and they want to escape, or they just, that's the truth? But then, is this also the right way to prove whether someone is guilty in the death of a husband or not? So Josie, for instance, said it is painful to see your fellow woman go through these pains. How can you drag a woman naked in public? All the women who have gone through this have never been the same again. As I speak to you now, one has developed a mental problem as a result. So some of the psychological problems associated with being undergoing such painful and degrading rights is reflected in the statement of Amina. So then what is the way forward? I would want most of us to come on board and share our thoughts on what we can do, especially for these women in the rural areas. There's been a lot of crusade campaigns about women empowerment. We've seen there's been a noticeable progress, of course, in the cities here, but then in the rural areas, they still continue to face all these sort of constraints. They are silent, they are unable to express, share their views, etc. I thought of adopting measures and strategies to challenge and address negative traditional practices against women. These are actually entrenched in their society. They value them and they still practice these negative traditional practices. We can also collaborate with local leaders, especially the men, in abolishing the barbaric practices, since most of these practices are championed by the men. And then when it comes to local leadership, they value their leaders a lot. So once we get the leaders on board, I'm sure they will be able to talk to their members about the negative consequences of these practices. And also the women empowerment campaigns, we should continue to embark on them, especially in these rural areas and also the northern part of Ghana with respect to my research, which is predominantly rural. So I'll be glad to hear the views of people here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eunice. We have about 10 minutes now for questions for Eunice. And while people, and please feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you to unmute yourself and also turn on your camera if you'd like to, or feel free to post questions in the chat function as well. But Eunice, I might just take the opportunity while people are gathering their thoughts to ask you a question. So I was just wondering about sort of whether there's any kind of grassroots activism happening within the local community. Are the women organising to try and support each other in sort of challenging these sort of patriarchal structures?
Yes, there are some women's organizations, as I said earlier on, but they are restricted in the sense that they are just supposed to push for the agenda of women, do womanly sort of things. So then if there's a woman in need, they contribute and then offer an assistance to them. But when it comes to actually challenging these practices, it becomes very difficult because those in the leadership positions or roles are men, and getting to them, looking at the numbers, few of the women and more of the men, it's very difficult to get them to see why these practices need to be abolished.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Eunice from the panel, from the audience? Eunice, people might have run out of steam by now. This is the last panel of the session today. But please, if anyone does think of any questions that they'd like to ask Eunice, I'll open up. Oh, Vincent's just turned on his camera.
Yeah.
Yep, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Abbey, for such an interesting presentation. And of course, having been from Ghana, though not from that part of the country, I sort of have a bit of insight into what you say. But what I would like to ask is that, for instance, you're calling for collective effort and how, some attention could be drawn to these issues. But my question is that, so in terms of the city, in areas such as the cities or the bigger cities, you see these women empowerment agencies or bodies predominantly in these areas. And these are not where this women marginalization and victimizations are really happening. They are actually happening in the remote areas. So did you find out why this, or in your research, did you ever come across why these women empowerment agencies or bodies or institutions are not rather moving into these areas where these experiences are really, really being felt? And they seem to be in the city and making all the noise, and of course, some progress is being achieved, but the very places where these things are really being perpetrated, not much attention is taken there, or not resources or effort are directed in these areas. What could be challenges in that respect?
Thank you, Vincent. Actually, these NGOs, the role of NGOs, it was also one of the objectives for my research. There are actually some NGOs in these rural areas who are making a lot of efforts to promote the empowerment of women. However, again, the challenge has to do with the leadership in these rural communities being composed of more men. So it's so difficult for them to break through. And I mean, at what point do we draw the line between tradition and then some of these westernized theories concerning women empowerment? So for me, I only researched into the roles that they play. However, some of the challenges that they, in engaging with the NGOs came up had to do with resources. They needed the money sometimes to set up some sort of an income generating activity or project for the women. And these monies or resources were not forthcoming. So then they were not able to effectively achieve their goals. As to how most of the NGOs are in the cities, I didn't find out, but then a good guess, or from my experiences, I would say that, of course, living in the remote or rural areas is very difficult. I mean, most people wouldn't want to go and live in a place where there's no light. I mean, there are no hospitals, etc. So then I am thinking that these are some of the reasons or the factors that demotivate most of these NGOs from getting into or moving to the rural areas where there are a lot of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Eunice, for, oh, Kennedy just raised his hand as well. Please go ahead.
Just a very quick question. That's quite an interesting presentation, Eunice. In your research, have there been instances where women and men have been working on some of the issues that you identified, or is that a rare occurrence?
Thank you, Kennedy. Actually, no. So in most of these campaigns, they go and they target the women. But then these are issues that concern both the women and the men. And the men being the brains behind some of these, most of these practices. So then I sought to find out the perceptions of the men concerning these negative practices or the challenges disadvantages that the women experience in their community. There's nothing like a collaboration where men and women are working together. However, some of the interesting things I gathered was that though the men were aware that these practices do not promote the well-being of the women, is degrading, it does not dignify them. But then to them, they are getting rid of women who are evil in society. For instance, the widowhood rights, where they are ascertain whether you killed your husband or not. So by you confessing, and then there are consequences, of course, when they find out that you did. It's either you are, sacked from the village, or you are actually dissociated from people. So in their minds, they are getting rid of evil women who are murderers in the village. So they actually had no, how do I put it, like empathy concerning how these practices actually affect the well-being, psychological, financial well-being of the women. So I think this is incumbent on all of us stakeholders, those of us who are interested in women empowerment issues, to actually get the men on board if we want to be effective or achieve great results with these empowerment issues or projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eunice. We're actually out of time now for questions. So I'll now move on to the team from Solidarity Watch in France. So Oliver, Kenny and Sengoline, they're from Solidarity Watch, which is a collective of social science researchers and activists based in France. They'll be talking to us today about solidarity crimes and crimmigation, an exploration of solidarity and community in French activist networks giving aid to undocumented migrants. Thank you, Oliver and and Sengoline. I'll pass on to you now. Oliver, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, can you hear me now, Charlene?
Yeah. Okay,
excellent. So yes, so hello, good morning from France. I know you're in the afternoon there, but we've just got up. So I'm Oliver, and I'm here today with Ségolène, who's also from Solidarity Watch. We're a collective of researchers and activists based mainly in France, working on questions of solidarity in relation to immigration. Now, I'm one of the few group members who does not have a background in political sciences. I'm mostly a sort of editor and translator, but as the native English speaker, I was asked to do this presentation. And then at the end, if you've got any questions, which I hope you will, Ségolène will respond to those. She's a political sciences expert. Rather than simply just present one of our projects, we also wanted to explain a little bit about what we do and want to do at Solidarity Watch. So the presentation will be split into three different brief sections, broadly sort of past, present, and future. Firstly, a little summary of a study that we're going to be publishing very soon in a collected edition from Routledge. Then a presentation of Solidarity Watch, where we speak from and how we see ourselves. And then finally, some ideas about future projects and collaborations and where we would like to go. And obviously, we'd love to hear your questions, comments, and feedback at the end. So just to go straight into the study we looked at. So this study was based on the method of collective ethnography of 11 trials, which took place in France between 2015 and the present day. Just to go back to that first slide, these are all based in the Alpes Maritime area of southern France, just on the border with Italy. So the primary research consists of close qualitative analysis of the available information on the trials, as well as 8 interviews with the defendants and 6 further interviews with legal intermediaries such as lawyers and NGOs. In each case, the defendants were prosecuted in the Maritime Alps region of southern France under Article L622-1, which states that, and I quote, "Any person who either directly or indirectly facilitates or attempts to facilitate the entry, transit, and irregular stay of an alien in France," end quote, risks a prison sentence of up to 5 years and a fine of up to 30,000 euros. So a lot of money, and in general, just illegal immigrants writ large. So several of these trials achieved a notable amount of media attention on the grounds that the defendants were effectively being prosecuted for what has come to be known as a solidarity crime. In French, that's un délit de solidarité. This is understood as the criminalization of acting in solidarity with a person in need, in these cases with migrants coming into France from Italy. In each case, the defendant provided food or shelter or transport to someone who did not have the legal right to enter or stay in France. We were particularly interested in investigating the collective socialization process to the law that took place around these solidarity crimes. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. So it took place around these solidarity crimes trials, and also the effect of these trials on migrant support networks which pre-existed the events. Some defendants had a long experience in these support networks, while others had very little. While some were able to mobilize the trials to give visibility to the issue, others were worn down by the heavy burden of the trials and multiple appeals. So just to give you a sense of some of the work we've done and how long it took, as you can see, this sort of begins in 2015, and several of these cases that we've looked at, although they started in around 2017, 2018, they still haven't been resolved. So this is many years of legal battles. And one thing we also looked at was the way that activist networks were forced to adapt their strategies in light of all of this. The study ultimately taught us a lot about the impact of judicial repression on migrant solidarity networks, as well as about the need to nuance an undifferentiated notion of solidarity, which can unhelpfully mask gender, race, and class differences between defendants able to mobilize the notion of solidarity crime in their defense and in the media, and those whose social capital limited their access to those very solidarity networks. As an example, let us look quickly at 3 cases. So on the one hand, Claudine, and on the other, Jean-Jacques and David. It's 2 cases, but I'll bundle them together. So Claudine, who is this person here in the timeline, was the first person in the Maritime Alps region to see her case mediatized as a solidarity crime. Despite her activist experience and her knowledge of the legal system, she approached her arrest and trial somewhat naively. Having not realized her actions would face legal consequences, she had not taken any precautions and did not receive any support from local organizations. She had not been trained in any anti-repression tactics in order to defend herself legally, and incriminated herself with candid comments to the police, which her lawyers later stated was a bad idea, because while she felt she had done nothing wrong, her actions were in fact illegal. A few months later, she was fined 1,500 euros, and she did not appeal this as she feared being, quote, eaten alive if she appealed, eaten alive in court. In the wake of the hardening of borders after the attacks in Paris in 2015, I'm referring to a number of attacks called so-called terrorist attacks, where a lot of people were killed, activist groups became more militant in their attempts to help those crossing the Franco-Italian border. Local organizations with national organizations started police monitoring at the border and other joint activities. In other words, the Maritime Alps became the most important place for local NGOs to boost their activities in supporting migrants. Repression led to a rise in arrests, but also increasing collective knowledge of the processes of arrest and prosecution and greater interpersonal connections between members of the network. And that's one of the things we're particularly interested in. When they were arrested in late 2016, Jean-Jacques and David, our second case, unlike Claudine, had no ties to the migrant solidarity networks, nor any intimate knowledge of the judicial system. They had engaged in some acts of solidarity from time to time, but were not formally or regularly involved with any organizations before their arrest. However, in their case, they were immediately able to receive advice from specialist lawyers, and through collective community support, they rapidly familiarized themselves with the legal procedures to the extent that David became a sort of mediatized spokesperson in the fight against the solidarity crime. In their cases, hundreds of people came to court to watch the proceedings, and afterwards the court records were pored over by dozens of people from the networks in what constituted a form of collective apprenticeship. For national organizations, their trials were judicial opportunities for taking a stance against the solidarity crime. So David and Jean-Jacques effectively became emblematic case studies for this idea and were discussed in many media outlets across the country. So one key conclusion to note is that the collective socialization process took place as individuals and collectives adapted and evolved within the changing legal and activist environment. However, given the differing activist positions within this socialization process, it cannot necessarily be considered a success. Several defendants were able to weaponize their prosecutions and achieved significant media coverage and national discussion around their cases and the need to show solidarity with migrants. They saw their prosecutions as an opportunity. Many others, however, either rejected the idea that the courts were ever going to provide any justice, or were either unable or unwilling to try and exploit the potential of a mediatized trial. As mentioned before, having the weight of the judicial system focused upon you is very difficult, and many people, for a variety of reasons, often linked to social, political, and financial capital, as well as family or carer responsibilities or social or economic precarity, were unable to mobilize the complex community networks required to have any chance of achieving the activist aims through media visibility. As such, despite the success of some of the trials, which led to acquittals and reductions in the penalties, the trials did not lead to an expansion of the migrant support networks, nor to an increase or reinforcement of the practices of solidarity in the region. As such, by 2018, the fight against the solidarity crime had more or less vanished from the public sphere. The fight can therefore be mainly understood as encompassing the series of appeals led by the defendants and their lawyers, rather than a broader social movement that could have developed into a national social mobilization, which was, of course, the aim from the beginning in many ways. Moreover, as can be seen from the diagram, these 11 trials were in fact just the tip of the iceberg. So the ones I've just spoken around are only 2 of the 11 or 3 of the 11 that we looked at in this study. And there were in fact over 500 prosecutions in the period in question, which received little or no community support and or media coverage. So while the notion of solidarity here primarily encompasses the solidarity between a French national and a migrant, the limited visibility of the vast majority of those acting in solidarity raises questions about whose solidarity can be named as such, adding a second layer of desolidarization to the issue of migrants entering France, likely drawn along class, race, and gender lines, although our research has yet to determine this. So if I move on quickly just to talk a bit more about us as a group, Solidarity Watch was born in the summer of 2017 in Marseille in southern France, same sort of large region, but a bit further away from the Alpes Maritime border region. At a meeting
Oliver,
of several...
just to let you know, you've got three minutes left.
Okay. So Yeah, so we're a group of broadly social science researchers, apart from myself. And in general, one of the things we're particularly interested in was forming a collective to better understand the significance of the criminalization of solidarity taking place on a European scale, and to unite all those who see this as exemplary of the broader ideology structuring our understanding of community in our contemporary societies. So we have this broader idea, but focused in on very specific cases. We have an idea of moving this beyond just migration, thinking about ideas about access to healthcare and housing and environmental protections and so on and so forth. But at the moment, we're very much focused on these things, not least because most of us don't have permanent jobs, and so and funding, and so the possibilities of achieving any of this are limited. So I'll quickly jump to what we hope to achieve. My apologies, Charlene, for going on too long. So at the moment, one of our main aims is to set up a database of solidarity crime prosecutions across Europe. Given the point we made earlier about the invisibility of the vast majority of these prosecutions, it would make a huge difference to have detailed knowledge about all the people involved as a way of increasing the collective knowledge and legal socialization of the network. The second thing we would like to do, and we've been doing this somewhat, is to develop networks in order to gain knowledge and collaborate further. That's one of the reasons we wanted to come and present our stuff to you today. We've made some links with migrant solidarity networks, such as the Groupe d'information et de soutien aux immigrés, Délinquants solidaires in France, and some other groups in Belgium, and especially EU-wide organizations such as Borderline Europe and Migre Europe. The big thing we're working on at the moment is trying to get funding for a bigger project. And with this, we're working with someone in France's central government research body. And we have a bigger project which would involve money for field research into the forms of actions taken by the authorities to suppress solidarity. 2, actions taken in solidarity, so again, a bit linked to the database idea. And thirdly, more information about the groups and the individuals being targeted by these forms of repression. We would also like to expand this, and we have collaborators from Italy, Belgium, and Germany in order to expand this beyond France. So just a final note, so this project is due to run for 2 years and involves a series of seminars for the different researchers to exchange their findings and adjust their methods, as well as a large event open to civil society actors and other stakeholders in order to broaden the discussion beyond political science researchers. The stated aim is to investigate state repression of solidarity, both with and between migrants, although the between part is perhaps less obvious thus far, by bringing together research into migration with research into social movements in order to better understand how repression and fights against repression question, but also reinforce the asymmetries of race, gender, and class relations, and more generally, national borders. Thank you very much. If you'd like to get in contact, we've got a collective email there. Thank you very much. Charlene.
Thank you so much, Oliver. It's hugely interesting endeavour that you're progressing, and please do post your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question of Oliver. But I was just wondering, given the kind of state-sanctioned repression of acts of solidarity, are you seeing fewer and fewer people putting themselves out there to, help and support migrants?
This is where I'll have to hand it over to Ségolène, who has more knowledge about the exact cases.
Yes, but I'm sorry, Charlene, I did not hear well your question. So could you just repeat, please? Sure.
Yeah, sure. I'm just wondering whether, because of this sort of the state repression of acts of solidarity and the sort of criminalization of it, are you seeing fewer people willing to put themselves out there to support migrants who maybe need support?
There are migrant networks with migrants. They are well organized, and historically it's led by I would say maybe 5 big organization NGOs. people are also what's been new since and very mediatized also is that people started to self-organize themselves in small cities or villages, like in the Maritime Alps. But what is remain kind of a blind spot, and we want to address it, is also the way that migrants have self-organization of delivering solidarity for themselves. And what we try to reach this chapter is that blind spot, that talking about solidarity with migrants is always talking about national solidarity with migrants, but never solidarity by migrants with migrants. So it's very much framed as an non-existent phenomenon, whereas it happens all along the routes, the migratory route. And when it comes to be framed, is much more like it's based on a criminal basis, like people are smugglers. But we cannot really frame solidarity in the same way between a national and a migrant person. Like if I give you 10 euros to take a route between Ventimiglia and Nice, it doesn't mean the same if I have kind of a good life and if I have no status, no administrative status, and no income. So that's the phenomenon we want also to decipher.
Thank you. Now, we've had a question from Simon Batterbury in the chat. He's written in both French and English. Simon, did you want to ask the question yourself?
Good day et bonjour. I just want to know how the networks work in France between the different solidarity organizations, because I know here we sometimes have tensions between our support networks. And secondly, how do you deal with the legal and confidential nature of particular cases if you have a database that you're forming of les clandestins et tout ça?
Thank you for your questions, Simon. So the migrant support networks are well organized, for example, by the GISTI, the CIMAD, Amnesty International, etc. And they have their proper struggle agenda, I would say. But then when what is unlikely framed as crisis at borders happen, people in Calais or in the Roya Valley or self-organize solidarity, then the bigger organization, mostly based in Paris, they came in Calais and the Roya Valley, for example, and they add coordination and be more like a political agenda to what was already done by local organization, collectives, but also even more informal organization. It's true that there are tensions, like between the No Borders in the Roya Valley and the activists from Amnesty International, who claim to be apolitical, etc. There are tensions, but so they don't have the same strategies. But as they're also on that kind of, I would say, hotspot, they work on the temporality of crisis. They don't split. It doesn't lead to rupture points or turning points in the local networks. It's more like there is like a sort of a coordination of their activities. They don't share the same belief. They won't support the same activities. For example, No Borders in the Roya Valley, they also try to implement sort of popular education about how the French system works, etc. And that was really something which was criticized by more activists like the one of Amnesty International or La CIMAD, but it did not came to a rupture in the fact that they were delivering food together, they were doing police monitoring together, etc. Because of the temporality of crisis, which does not authorize this kind of split, I would say. But then, once the crisis went down, they stopped working together. It's like they are activists. They have their political agenda, and they grasp a situation to struggle for, and maybe they meet around these situations, but otherwise they won't be working together. And regarding the confidential nature of information, for now we are designing the survey, so it will be online, so everyone can inform about a case of criminalization. And the database, which will be located in Lime survey, the software Lime survey, then we will put it in a encrypted cloud, so with double access. So we try to make sure that it cannot be breached, but it's true that there is also always a risk of being hacked, and in that case by authorities, because we are doing a work that could very much interest police officers. And regarding confidential information, we don't keep it if not necessary. And if we have it, if it's been encoded in the survey, so we record it. For example, David will be letter A and Jean-Jacques letter B. But it can always be breached.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Oliver and Ségolène? Kennedy, go ahead.
Thanks, Charlene, and thanks for Oliver and Ségolène for very interesting presentation and discussion. In your work, what has been the kind of solidarity that the communities within which the migrants are found, what kind of solidarity have they expressed? Have they been in support of the state that is prosecuting the migrants, or have they been in support of the migrants, or is it a little bit of a mixture of both?
They are in support of the migrants, but because of all the bias based on race, gender, etc., it's true that at the end, migrants don't come to have the same status for NGOs, etc. So it also explains that, for example, if you go on the website of the GISTI, they are doing their best, but anyway, at the end, they have an index of the cases of prosecution based on the legal article that we also took as a case, or as a in the chapter. And so you have only 3 cases of people prosecuted who are not French people. And if you look at the description of the cases, the only information you have is that people are prosecuted, and that they are foreigners and their nationality. So they are not presented the same way. Maybe the members of the GST did not get the information, but at the end, at the channels of information, it shows that these people, they don't come to have a proper identity. They're only a man originated from maybe Tunisia and prosecuted at that date for this action. So it does not result from intentionality at that moment, which is very much more difficult to change. So they are in support of migrants because they they get engaged in struggling for that. But at the end, when it comes to defend someone for being prosecuted in the name of solidarity crime, it's not the same depending on who is that person. So it's more spontaneous to defend Mireille with an activist, a retired activist from Amnesty International, than this Tunisian that just helped two people to cross the border between France and Italy, but was no name, was no article on him. Nobody tried to get contact with his lawyer or lawyer, etc., etc. So you see that's it's not that it's subtle, it's more like it's insidious. And things are changing now because at the time it became obvious that there was kind of a huge blind spot. And these NGOs, so we participate in it also to reshape the agenda, are trying to integrate that new way of problematizing the solidarity crime in their activities. But to me, they are they do too slowly. But that's why also we wanted to work that NGOs in designing the database. You see, what like at each meeting, well, like what are the cases you know but you did not report for? Where are the people? How can we get access to them? And sometimes it's very disappointing and surprising. Like, yes, we are working in the maison d'arrêt, like the jail of Nice, and there 80% of people are foreigners, and they are prosecuted on the basis of the article, legal article we worked on. And we were like, okay, so what didn't you say that before? Because why there is no case of solidarity crime from them? You know, they are. It's where there is the big mass of people prosecuted in the against solidarity between migrants, and at first they did not took that into account. And sorry, I'm maybe too long, but there is.
So the thing I just wanted to perhaps just add to that is to link it to that previous point Ségolène made about the strategy, because there's also just this, people may care about everything, but they decide that if we're going to change the law, we need to convince particular people in parliament to support this. And if we have a nice white woman from a middle-class background in Nice who was a retired person and helped someone in her car, we're going to have much more chance of convincing people than we are if we take someone of color who has maybe themselves a non-standard immigration background, etc., etc. So I think there's also, regardless of what the organizations may think of people, there is also this strategy behind it, and the mediatized strategy of, and we could talk a lot, Ségolène and I was talking about today, about the people who became the emblems. Someone called Cédric Amou, who became like the person for the solidarity crime, is also not very representative, and yet he's the most well-known person. If you look up solidarity crime on a Google Images search, he's who will come up, but he's not very representative. So I suppose it throws up all his strategies as well. Sorry, just to add that in.
Thank you. We've got a couple more minutes left, and I know Eunice has raised her hand.
Thank you very much, Oliver. This is a very great initiative you've taken, because I can actually relate when you were doing the presentation. I mean, the first time I traveled outside Ghana, my friends and I, we had some issues because we didn't pay when we got on the bus and we were fined. Actually, we didn't know that we had to pay. We thought it was the same, procedure as in our native or in our home country. We tried to genuinely make them understand.
Did we lose Eunice? We have.
Lost Eunice?
Yeah, I think so.
I think Eunice would have dropped out because of the power.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She didn't quite manage to ask a question, so I might just very quickly. So there's someone that actually posted a question in the chat but had to leave, but it's a really interesting question, so I'll ask it anyway. So she said, I'm wondering, what are the solidarity networks you're forming, particularly in Africa and the border transit countries, in the Maghreb and North Africa.
Okay, so to connect with NGOs or collectives who are in North Africa or West Africa, it's through the networks MigrEurope, because MigrEurope itself, it's already a network of European and African organizations dealing with migration. At first, they worked and they still work on the process of externalization of the European borders in North African states. And now they came to the topic of phenomenon of criminalization of solidarity. So by working with MigrEurope and within MigrEurope, we get connected to this African organization, and also we get, to give you an example, there are even more violent way of criminalizing solidarity, as in Senegal a few months ago, a father was prosecuted on a legal basis, which was about the way of being responsible and taking care of your children. And he went on the terrace with his kid, and his kid drowned during the travel. And the state, instead of doing nothing like always, or just sending Border Patrol and Frontex, prosecuted this father for having not taking care of his children. So there are even worst way of criminalization, and in that sort in these states. And it's very important. What we don't have the time to expand on this, but we are very conscious that we have a Eurocentric, and also we are all European citizen in the collective for now. So that we have to very much take into account from the beginning the fact that it's really not the center of the world.
Thank you. Eunice has rejoined us. So Eunice, would you like to just finish asking your question? If you can hear us. Perhaps not. Okay, well.
Perhaps she can drop us an email if she wants to ask
Eunice,
the question.
if you can hear us,
yeah.
Please send them an email. I might call that a day. Franka, do I need to hand back to you now?
Yeah, I can. I can officially end the conference. Well, not a conference. My apologies. The day. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to be with us today. It ends the first day of the panel days, which is continues from tomorrow until Friday. So we look forward to seeing all of you, hopefully, and please share the program with your friends and your colleagues and your networks. And those of you who presented, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and those who are also came to sort of listen and support and ask questions. We are really appreciative of your insight and your engagement. So thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. The program starts at 10:30. It's all in the program. We have an exciting line of presentations tomorrow. So we look forward to seeing you all.
Thanks very much to the organizers.
Or
Thanks,
good
everyone.
morning, wherever you are based.
Good, yes.
Okay, bye guys, and see you tomorrow.